This is Blake Temez with the Blake Temez podcast, where I speak as a Catholic layman to Catholic laymen about missional living, wisdom cultivation, and legacy building in service of Christ and his bride, the Church. Thanks for being here. Today, let's talk about bridal mysticism. If you've never heard of the term, you're probably at least encountered the concept in one way or the other, because it's implicit in a lot of Christian culture, even if it's not stated outright. The general idea behind bridal mysticism is the framing of the soul of the individual person as feminine in relation to God or Jesus, such that spiritual growth or development results in a union that is analogous to marriage. To put it more plainly, it's a spirituality in which the soul is married to God. And the development of this bridal mysticism has roots that have been traced by a Catholic author named Leon J. Podles in his book, The Church Impotent. And it's related to a series of developments in the life of the Church that we won't explore in detail at present, but that have to do with developments in the theology regarding celibacy, virginity in the case of the early church, and developments in religious life, when monks or nuns take vows, and particularly in the writings of the doctor of the church, Saint Bernard of Clairvaux, who himself was a Cistercian monk. And his writings, especially his commentary on the Song of Songs or the Song of Solomon, a book of the Bible, made this analogy of the soul as a feminine subject that is then wed to the masculine subject, which is God. And of course, his analogy is not without precedent within the wider tradition of the Church. There's many places within Scripture or the Church's liturgy where Christ is seen in the image of bridegroom, right? And so if Christ is the bridegroom, well, then who's the bride? If he's the husband, who's the wife? And one way that we can understand this bridegroom-bride relationship is for us to see the church as a whole, the whole people of God, as the bride of the bridegroom, right? So it's not that any one individual, any one Christian is married to Christ, but it's the whole community as the church that is married to Christ. Again, kind of these analogies between the head and the body, with Christ being the head and the church being his body, and these passages in the writings of St. Paul about the husband being the head of his wife, and then him connecting that analogy to Christ being the head and the church being his body. And so there's all these metaphors that are at play in different parts of Scripture. And so Saint Bernard wasn't just making things up, right? He was drawing from Scripture, drawing from writers in the early church, and developing them further. And so when we talk about bridal mysticism and its perils, it's not as if there's no legitimate aspects to the the framing of spirituality in this way at all, right? So it's not as if we have to toss it all out and we can't read or learn about bridal mysticism from the writings of saints, not to mention saints who are doctors of the church. But we do want to consider how this current of bridal mysticism has developed over time and resulted in a certain kind of feminization of Christian spirituality that is not as conducive to reaching men and their more innate ways of thinking about relationships and their internal life and their development in general. So again, with that caveat, kind of taking another look at bridal mysticism does not negate it, but just acknowledges a need for something else, something to complement it, right, that takes note of masculine values, the general masculine ethos. So bridal mysticism is present in the church in different ways at present. When we sing at church, for instance, and this is present both in evangelical settings, but also in some Catholic environments, and we sing praise and worship music, right? When we sing songs to God, whether that's at Mass, in a church service outside of the Catholic Church, or in devotional settings, when the lyrics are such that it's obviously a kind of love song to Jesus, that's a modern manifestation of a bridal mysticism that sees the individual Christian as the beloved of the lover, right, who is Jesus. And so that's one way it's present. We can also see it present in language that describes Christian discipleship as being in love with Jesus, or right, being wed to him in some way. Now, this has another aspect to it, and it can often result in a way of speaking about men and women and their spirituality that suggests that women are innately more spiritual than men, just more religious than men, because this posture of being a bride before God or before Jesus is the necessary one to take. And so because the feminine experience is more suited to that bridal posture, if we want to call it that, then there must be something more spiritual innately in women than there is in men. And then the other byproduct of that mindset is that men need to become more like women if they are going to be spiritually developed, right? If the height of spirituality is to be a submissive, devoted bride to Jesus, then that requires, the man to position himself, imagine himself in that way, which, as you can imagine, even for the most dedicated Christian, could just not be a comfortable space to enter into one's imagination. And so there's a lot more behind this kind of idea that women are more spiritual by their nature. A lot of authors from the Middle Ages and on kind of saw this, drawing from different philosophical currents, like Aristotle and others. And so again, it's not without precedent. These things don't just come from nowhere. They're all a part of this system, right, that develops over time with these different interacting parts and different theologians and mystics and ordinary Christians talking about them, having different experiences, and then writing about them, and then sharing their writings. And they all contribute to where we get at the present day. And so I bring up bridal mysticism because it is prominent within Catholic spiritual theology, but then also hidden in ways that we might not see. For instance, in the songs that we sing at church or in other settings. And so having an awareness of this framing of the language of spirituality can teach us, can show us why some men, even just subconsciously, are going to just not be attracted, right, to the Christian message, to the Christian life, if the implicit message is you need to become more like a woman, more like a bride, in order to be close to God or in order to be faithful to Jesus. And so what we want to explore, something that you can do in your work as a Catholic mentor, a missionary, or a minister, is come to terms with how spirituality can be framed in other ways so that men can connect with it, right? And not that you have to invent anything. In future episodes, we'll talk about these metaphors and images from Scripture, right, that give us alternatives to bridal mysticism, or some complements to it that are going to be more native to the masculine ethos. So, in any case, I hope that this is helpful, and maybe a new concept has been introduced to you. Something has been kind of like awakened in you to see this influence within the church. And look forward to keep the conversation going. And as always, thank you for your time and attention, and God bless.